All right. So thank you everyone for coming. This is part of the Indiana University Library's COVID-19 data series, which is a series of webinars related to COVID-19 data to which IUB students, faculty, and staff have access. Every webinar focuses on a different type of data from a different vendor or collaborator. Knowledge of these data can be helpful for researchers starting new projects or students understanding the nature of the market or industries for which they hope to work after graduation. And the theme of this webinar is geographic and social science data. And we have here Juan Vasquez from SimplyAnalytics, who is a support specialist there. And he's going to show us what COVID-19 data they have available through SimplyAnalytics at a time series table or rank areas area, and how that can be used in collaboration with some of SimplyAnalytics' other data that Indiana University Bloomington has access. And Rosemary has asked, how do I sign up for other events that are part of the series? That is a great question. You can do that from the Scholars Common page, and I will put a link in there. This is the second in the series, and we'll have 2 more that are scheduled as well. So if there, we're going to get started here as well. I'm going to leave the chat open, but I'd like to suggest that people leave their questions until the end, just because that can be very distracting to the presenter sometimes as well. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the full floor to Juan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Alana. And thank you guys for joining me this afternoon to talk SimplyAnalytics. So before we get kind of started showcasing the software, I prepared just a really brief PowerPoint presentation to make sure that we're all on the same page relative to understanding what SimplyAnalytics is, what it does, and sort of what you can do with the program. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will begin. So let me pull up my PowerPoint here. Okay, so firstly, for those people who are completely new to SimplyAnalytics, just to understand what we are as a company and as an application, we are a web-based mapping, analytics, and data viz application that makes it easy for anyone to create interactive maps, charts, and reports using thousands of different data variables. So the way that it works is we partner with different data companies such as Dun & Bradstreet, Nielsen, Simmons, AGS. We take their complex data sets and we incorporate it into our platform, again, in a way that is approachable and easy to use. So next, we'll talk a little bit about what type of data is actually available. So in general, SimplyAnalytics is much more than just demographic data. But one thing to point out is you do have access to over 40,000 demographic data variables from the ACS. And this is really great because you're going to have access to current year estimates and also projections of ACS data. So you're going to have access to things like age, gender, race, ethnicity, language, housing, disability status, poverty, and much more. Now, through your subscription at Indiana, you're also going to have access to decennial census data from 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, and those supplemental forms. Additionally, there's a ton of consumer expenditure data. So you could look up what people are spending on tuition and health insurance and food spending. There is weather data from the NOAA. There's over 5 million businesses that you have access to, a ton of consumer behavior data via the MRI and life stages, as well as crime data from the FBI. Now, the reason why we're here today, though, is to talk specifically about the COVID-19 data that we have incorporated into SimplyAnalytics. And so essentially, that COVID-19 data is broken down into 2 distinct areas. So this will cover confirmed cases and also deaths. This data begins on January of 2020. And each of those confirmed cases and deaths also has associated with it the total number. So that'll just give you the actual raw data, right? So it would say something like, well, there was 3,200 deaths on this particular day, and then the prevalence per 100,000. And that's actually something that we calculate in-house. Now, the data that we pull, the COVID data that we get is pulled from USA Facts, and they update that data daily. So we try our best to actually keep in line with updating daily. So again, this data goes back to January of 2020. So you'll be able to track that across every single month. Now, the wonderful thing about SimplyAnalytics is because you have access to so much data that I talked about on the previous slide, like all of the demographic data, consumer spending data. The great thing is you get to commingle that data with this COVID-19 data as well, right? So it's kind of interesting because you can create a ranking report to, let's say, analyze all of the counties in the US, which is something that we'll do today. But what's interesting is you get to throw in other data variables into that too. So you could theoretically see, well, this area has a ton of cases per 100,000. Well, what is it spending on health insurance, or what percentage of them are Hispanic? And it kind of allows you to see, is there any trends in the data that you see? Is there higher prevalence per 100,000 of COVID cases in places that are lower income? Well, that's something that you could actually look at in SimplyAnalytics. So now that we understand a little bit about SimplyAnalytics and what we do as a company, let's actually just get started. And if you're very new to SimplyAnalytics, that's okay. SimplyAnalytics is designed to get up and running really quickly. So I've signed in to SimplyAnalytics here. Now, if you want to follow along, I do actually have, there's actually room. So if you want to follow along, please feel free to go through your library's website right now, list of databases, and you're welcome to follow along with me. Okay, so I've signed into SimplyAnalytics here. If you're really new, you'll be met with this onboarding slideshow. So if you are just signing in for the first time, you'll be met with this onboarding slideshow. It's nice because it just gives you an idea of how to get started with SimplyAnalytics. I'm gonna go ahead and close this out. Now, all of the work that you do in SimplyAnalytics gets put into projects. And projects require two things. One, we need to specify at least one location that we're interested in analyzing. And these locations that you specify could be any number of different geographies. Now, keep in mind, though, that the COVID data is available at the national, the state, and the county level. So just keep that in mind if you specifically want to look up the COVID data. Just going to check on the chat here. Oh, thank you, Ilana. So I'm going to start specifying some locations that I'm interested in analyzing. So I'll throw in the state of Texas, Indiana. We'll throw in a county as well. Now, probably about 95% of the data in SimplyAnalytics is available all the way down to the block group level. So it's just something to keep in mind. So you're more than welcome to analyze data, let's say at your home zip code, or you can even type in an address as well. We'll just geocode that for you. So we'll just type in some other geographies here, like a zip code. Okay, so I'm good with these locations. We can always add or remove locations as we proceed. But the last step in creating your project is to specify at least one data variable that you are interested in analyzing. If you're new to SimplyAnalytics, please feel free to just go ahead and click on the Create Project here. Once you become more advanced, you can click this option to create your project without seed variables. But if you do that, you'll just be met with this gray screen. It'll kind of tell you like, hey, you need to add in some data variables. So again, if you're new, we kind of hand select some data variables for you just so we can get the project moving along, right? So you can see we have percentage of folks with a bachelor's degree or higher, median household income, and housing built in 1939 or earlier. But again, keep in mind, via the Indiana University libraries, your subscription is going to have tens of thousands of data variables, right? And don't worry, we're going to start throwing some more data variables in. So let's go ahead and create this project here. Okay, so you can see here that SimplyAnalytics has automatically generated some different views, or you can think of them as reports. And those are housed towards the right-hand side of your interface. And we're going to talk about most of these today. So you can see we have this comparison table, a quick report, a map, and a ranking. So right now we have a map selected, and we're presently looking at educational attainment, bachelor's degree or higher, in Texas by counties. And this is nice. Maps are nice because it gives you a visual analysis of a particular data variable. But we're here today to talk about the COVID-19 data, right? So what I want to do is I want to overlay a COVID-19 data variable on my map. I don't want to see this bachelor's degree data. So what I'm going to do is under my data block here towards the top left, and I'm going to browse by data folders here. And I'm just going to open up the COVID-19 outbreak data set that you see here towards the left. And as I mentioned in my PowerPoint, the data is broken down in two large sections between cases and deaths. So I'm going to open up the cases for January 2021, and I'll just pick one of these dates here. So to select the data variable in SimplyAnalytics, all you have to do is click on it. And when we close out the variables panel, you can see that our map has redrawn now to reflect the prevalence of confirmed COVID-19 cases per 100,000 as of January 6, 2021. We're still looking at Texas by counties, but maybe you wanted to jump over into looking at the United States. It's totally fine. At the very top here, we can cycle down here to the United States. So again, maps are nice because it just allows you a really quick visual reference point of the data. And what I mean by that is, looking at this data on a per 100,000 cases, this is nice because it helps to normalize some of the data, to help make sense of some of the data. We could look at just the raw tally as well, but in this case, we're looking at the per 100,000. So you've got this map here. And again, if you are completely new to SimplyAnalytics, you are more than welcome to zoom in to particular areas by hitting this little plus and minus option here towards the far left. So if you want to zoom into the state of Kansas, you are more than welcome to do that. So let me just zoom out a little bit here. Now, if you wanted to export this image, or if you wanted to just focus back into, let's say, Texas, and you wanted to export this image, you're more than welcome to do that. You can hit the export button here towards the top right. And I won't talk too much about the process of exporting, but you're welcome to kind of crop your image. You can add in text labels, and the image quality is extremely high quality. So please feel free to incorporate that into any presentations. You do have the ability to export in JPEG, PNG, PDF, or vector graphic formats. So if you want to add in text labels, it's here at the bottom. And yeah, so you can see that we can kind of give titles. And again, there's a lot of different options here with regards to editing the look and feel of your exported image. But we'll leave that for another presentation, right? So let me go ahead and close this out. Now, having the ability to map the data is one of the major features of SimplyAnalytics. Another feature that you're going to be really interested in is actually just looking at the actual raw data itself, right? And so there's going to be a couple of different ways to do that. The first thing that we'll take a look at is let's look at this comparison table here towards the top right. So the comparison table, you could think of this as creating a table from scratch where you specify the locations that you're interested in, and you specify the data variables that you're interested in as well. Now you actually see a couple of different data variables already here for me. And the reason for that is because whenever I specified at the very beginning when I created my project, those are those three seed variables that I kind of talked about. So that's why you see that here on my screen. So let's edit this view. So at the very top right, under View Actions, I'm going to click on Edit View. The reason why I'm doing that is because, well, I want to get rid of this zip code area. So that's one way to just remove that. Additionally, I want to start adding just some different COVID-19 data, just because I want to pull the raw data for my target locations. So if you're wondering, well, which report should I use? Just think of the comparison table as, well, I have some target locations in mind, and I have some target variables in mind. So this is just a really quick and easy way of answering that question. So in my case, I have Texas, Indiana, Dallas County in the US, and I want just some raw data, some raw COVID-19 answers for that. So I want to look up, let's say, deaths from COVID-19 on a per 100,000. I want to look up some different January total cases. And again, I'm kind of just clicking through these. And once you see the blue check mark and you close out the panel, you can see that if I click on Done, it's actually just going to add all these different data variables for me, which is really nice and convenient. So I'm going to click on Done. And you can see that I now have my table here with my selected data variables across my target locations that I was interested in. And here, again, you're more than welcome to start mixing in other data variables, right? Like I did have those three seed variables at the very beginning, but if you wanted to look up, let's say some consumer expenditure data, and you wanted to look up, let's say, what people are spending on health insurance or medical services, drugs, and medical supplies. Again, you see the blue check mark, close this out, and those data variables are just added in there at the very bottom of my report. So let me scroll up a little bit. Now, some of you might have noticed whenever I opened up my COVID-19 outbreak, you'll notice that it's for 2021, right? And I did mention in my PowerPoint that we have data going back to beginning in January of 2020. So keep in mind, if we want to get into the 2020 data, what we're going to have to do is here towards the left, the default is always going to be to your latest, right? And the latest year for the COVID data is, well, January 2021, right? So we need to click on this, and we need to actually go to 2020. And now when I do that and I reference my COVID-19 data set, you can see that I now have all the months and days within each of these months for all of 2020, right? So if you want to compare January 2021 cases with January 2020 cases, you're again totally welcome to do that by just clicking on the data variables, right? So you're clicking on these subfolders for May of 2020. See the blue check mark, close out, and you can see that they've been added in there for us. Okay, so let me scroll up a little bit here. Now, you are welcome to export this report, of course, and it's the same process. So you would just hit the export button here towards the top right, and you can export this report in Excel, CSV, or DBF formats. Now, if you would like to know a little bit more information about any of these data variables, like let's say this COVID-19 variable here, you could just click the data variable here and select view metadata. And if you scroll all the way down, we're going to give you a little bit more information about the data source along with the exact link to where we get our actual data. So if anyone is curious out there, we essentially pull the geocoded county data from USA Facts. We incorporate that into SimplyAnalytics, and because it gives us county level data, we're able to aggregate that out to the state and the county level. The state and the national level. So let me close this out here. So this is one way of taking a look at some of the data, and this is just through one report. Again, this comparison table. The best way to think of it, as I mentioned, is we're just building a table from scratch, right? Like these are the locations, and these are the data variables that I want. If I wanted to add in another location, you just hit the locations button here towards the top left, and you're welcome to add in, another location. And you can see once it's added in there, the data is just automatically thrown in there for me. Okay, so this is just one way of viewing the data. And that's the great thing about SimplyAnalytics. Again, we are partnering with these data companies, and we're just presenting you with an approachable way to interact and work with that data. Okay, so that is the comparison. Next, let's talk about the ranking report. So I'm going to click on the ranking report here towards the right. Now, the ranking report is nice because it allows me to analyze all of the smaller geographies in one larger location. So what do I mean by that? Well, it allows me to analyze all the counties in the United States. I could analyze all the cities in a state. I can analyze all the block groups in a county. You get the idea, as long as they're within one larger location. So what I need to do here is I need to edit this report, which we already know how to do. So we're going to select View Actions, edit this view. And I want to create a ranking report for all the counties in the United States. So I'm going to click on the US here. And well, I'm interested in some of the COVID data, of course. So I'm going to click on some of these COVID data variables here. Additionally, I'm interested in some of these healthcare spending data variables. And I'm also interested in income. So I'll leave that one checked. So let's go ahead and click on Done to finish editing our report. Okay, so now what we're seeing here, if you notice at the very top, we're looking at the top 100 Nielsen DMAs. Just as a note here, I'm logged into a demo account. So if you see DMAs here, you also might not as well. So it's just something to point out. I believe through Indiana, this wouldn't show up. So this would, I think, default to states, which is nice. So we're, again, looking at the top 100 states in the United States. I mentioned that I wanted counties. So I'm actually going to hit this drop down again and look up counties. So this is really great because I'm essentially just bulk analyzing hundreds of locations at once. Right now we're looking at the top 100, but if you want to look up all of the, I think there's 3,000 plus counties, you're more than welcome to just say, I want to look up the top, 10,000 or top 1,000. And you can see we've added in all of our data variables that I was interested in, health insurance spending, and also median household income and some educational attainment data. As the name implies, this report allows you to rank a data variable. So the way that we do that is at the very top, under top 100 counties in the US, let's hit this drop down and let's actually sort this by the prevalence of COVID cases per 100,000 individuals as of January 3rd. Okay, so let me click on that. So let me scroll a little bit here to the right. So you can see right here where my mouse is, I'm gonna click and drag this over here to the right. So you can see that this is showing me, so this is effectively ranking all those counties. So on a per 100,000 basis for counties in the US, this Crowley County in Colorado is the top as of January 3rd, 2021. And what's interesting is, again, well, I've added in some different demographic data variables, some different spending data variables, and I get to kind of see like, well, is there maybe like a general trend, right? Like, is there sort of a trend between maybe you would say median household income, for example? Well, this allows you to look at the data, export the data, and kind of see like, does that exist? And it is kind of interesting, right? Just looking at, you know, the median household income for this Crowley County is 37,000, right? You can kind of compare that with these other geographies and these other demographic data variables. So a really interesting data set. Again, if you want to export this, I already probably sound like a broken record, but it's at the top right. You just, you know, hit this export button. Okay, so that is the ranking report. Just to summarize why you want to use that. You want to use it anytime you want to analyze all of the smaller locations within one larger area. In my case, I want to look up all of the counties in the US. So I needed to use a ranking and set my location to be the United States. And I choose to analyze the United States by counties. Now, theoretically, you might be wondering, well, can I do that in a comparison table? You probably could, right? But you'd just be sitting here adding all 3,000 plus counties to your comparison table, and you know that's not so great. But the comparison table is nice, again, if you have target locations and target data variables. Okay, so at this point, we've talked about the comparison table. We've talked about the ranking report and how interesting it is to throw in some other data that you have access to. Again, as I mentioned, you have tens of thousands of data variables, so you could potentially unearth some interesting or unique insights into how these counties, is there something that makes them of particular, is there something in particular about them that makes them more likely to have this high prevalence on a per 100,000? So pretty interesting. Next, let's take a look at a related data table. The reason why I want to look up the related data table is I just want to look up the entire month of January of 2020. And I just wanted to see kind of like the growth, or maybe February of 2020. It doesn't really matter. So let's go ahead and create a related data table. So to open up a list of all the reports that you have access to, at the very top right here, there is a new view button. So you'll want to click this. And this is sort of the launching point to open up any of the reports that are in SimplyAnalytics. So again, there's reports that get created for us at the very beginning, like the map and the comparison and the ranking. But in my case, I want to open up a related data table. So you can see we have this related data table here. The related data table is nice because it allows you to choose one data variable, and SimplyAnalytics will throw in all of the sibling data variables. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I go into my data again, and I open up one of the COVID-19 outbreak months, let's say I want to go to February of 2020. Well, I don't want to click on all these data variables. So this related data table is just nice because I'm just going to click on one of them, close this out. I will click on done. And you could see that so just one thing to note, if there is no data, it would actually show up as 0. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let me just edit this so we could try to get some data out there on the map here. Okay, there you go. So again, this is just kind of interesting because I don't have to go in and manually click on every single one of those data variables. One thing to note at the very top here, you can see that we're sorting this by Texas. We can sort this by any of these other locations. And we're presently showing the mean data, but in my case, I actually just wanted to see the count data. So I'll click on count. And this is interesting because now I then get to say, well, I wanted to look up this trends for the month of January 1st through January 10th. And I wanted to track that over time for these particular, I wanted to track that over each day for these target locations, right? So this allows you to see if there is a growing trend or a decreasing trend. And again, we're looking at the count data, right, as I specified at the very beginning. And now you could see in Indiana, as of January 1st, there was 521,000. As of January 10th, there was 566,000, right? So there is a growing trend, unfortunately. But again, that's sort of the great thing about this report is, again, you kind of just click on one data variable and it throws in all of the related variables. So, so just keep that in mind. Anytime you want to, let's say, track a month over time, that's just going to be really helpful and really useful for you to be able to kind of just not have to add in every single data variable in that particular folder. Okay. So, and just to kind of throw this out there, if I were to select something like educational attainment for a bachelor's degree or higher, well, this is going to throw in all the different educational attainment data variables, right? So we'd throw in like, oh, if you have an associate's degree, or if you have less than a high school diploma. But again, that's the value of this related data table. I don't have to go in and just add in all the related data variables. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other reports that we have access to. So under new view here at the top right, I'm going to click on this. Just talking briefly on some more visualization options. So we've already taken a look at the map, but I'll also, we'll bring up a bar chart, and I'll spend just like a few seconds on this, but the bar chart is nice because it allows you to compare some different locations across a data variable. So let's track this, one of these data variables here. Click on done. And that your actual report there will just generate. So let me pull up the 2021 cases. There you go. So you can see that we've generated this bar chart, right? And again, this is also nice because this can be exported as well. So you can export your maps, you can export your bar charts. And yeah, so there's not much else to say about the bar charts. Again, you choose one data variable and specify the locations that you want to sort of just create a bar chart for those locations and data variables. Okay, next, let's take a look at a scatter plot. So just one more visualization option here. So at the very top right under new view, I'm going to open up this scatter plot here. So I'll click on create. And scatter plots are nice because it allows you to view a relationship between different types of data variables. And in this case, I'll just select maybe one of the COVID-19 data variables. And let's say on the y-axis, we'll have the median household income. And you'll see that here within my report, I have the X and Y axis that I get to choose. You can also change this in the scatter plot itself. But just from this edit kind of mode here, I'm just gonna kind of pick some of these. So let's, for the location, let's look up the US, click on done. And what this will do is this will then take all of the, in this case, states. So at the very top here, you could see that the points represent states in the US, but we can look up counties too. So we'll check on these counties here, and you get to kind of see what that looks like. So you can see, well, is there a positive or negative correlation between this median household income and these prevalence of COVID-19 cases per 100,000 as of January 3rd, 2021. And that's just really great. And if you want to edit this legend here, then within our legend, you can select the edit button here. And again, you could change the chart title, you could change your X and Y axis to specify the different data variables that you wanted to kind of see along there. So instead of median household income, maybe you want to look up having a bachelor's degree or higher. That's kind of an interesting data variable to look up. And again, the scatter plot will just replot to now represent my new value here. Additionally, within your legend here in our scatter plot, we'll also specify these Pearson's R, this correlation coefficient. This R value will be present, available for you. And like all things in SimplyAnalytics, if you want to export this, you just hit the export button at the top right. Okay, so at this point, we have taken a brief look at some of the things that you can do in SimplyAnalytics that are really quick and really easy to do, right? Again, the idea with SimplyAnalytics is it's supposed to be approachable. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spend maybe the last 10 or so minutes here just talking about just some other interesting things that you could do via applying filters and also overlaying different types of businesses on top of a map, which is pretty interesting. It's a little bit more advanced, but I think you'll be able to follow along. Okay, so what we're going to do is let's go ahead and toggle back here into our map. And this is a map showing us the, again, the COVID-19 cases as of January 6, 2021 per 100,000. And what I'm going to do now is I actually want to apply a data filter on top of this. And what data filters allow you to do is set up some conditions such that you only want to see areas that meet these conditions. So this will make a lot more sense in a second. So let's apply a filter here. So at the very top right, under filtering, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a filter here where I specify my condition as median household income. And you can see here towards the left, you have a number of different data variables. These are the data variables that we've interacted with in our project. And what's nice is any one of these that you can choose from can actually function as a condition, which is really interesting. So the conditions that we'll set forth here is median household income is greater than, and we'll put in, let's say, 70,000 here. I will click on apply. It might take a second to load, so I'll just close this out and we'll give it a few seconds here to actually generate. Okay. So what's happened here? So you'll notice that SimplyAnalytics has grayed out a bunch of locations. Well, why did it do that? Well, what it's done is it's grayed out the locations that don't meet my filter conditions, which I specified was income greater than 70,000. Now, this is interesting because I get to kind of see, well, what does the general prevalence look like once I apply an income filter on top of these, right? So these areas that you see here, they do meet my conditions. And we get to kind of see like what is the prevalence like in these areas? Looking at this visually. Now, the great thing is you can apply these filters onto reports as well. Particularly, what will be particularly useful will be applying the data filters on a ranking report, which again would be very useful. That way, you could just see, well, if I apply my filters, these are the locations that meet my filter conditions, and this is like the prevalence. So let me briefly demo what that would look like. So I'm going to toggle to my ranking report here. And yeah, it's basically the same thing at the very top here under filtering. I'll click on this, and again, I'll click on this median household income. And in this example, we'll set it to be, again, greater than 70,000. Click on apply. And you can see that SimplyAnalytics has grayed out all of these locations that don't meet my conditions. But I can actually hide these. So under filtering at the top right, I'm going to click on hide and apply. And this is just going to remove those locations. So this is actually really interesting, right? Because again, now I'm only looking at affluent counties, right? Assuming 70,000 is that gauge, right? Which, I think it is, okay? So we have that 70,000. So we're now only seeing these affluent counties that are present in my report for me. We can actually see how many counties meet that criteria. There's actually 271 counties in the US that have a median household income of over 70,000, right? So out of all the 3,000, there's only 270 that meet those conditions. But now I get to look up the prevalence of what are cases like in these more affluent places, right? But what might be interesting, and just to kind of throw maybe some ideas for future research, well, what is it like if we set this to, what would the prevalence be like if we did the opposite? And if we set this to be, let's say, less than 40,000 or less than 30,000, what would the prevalence look like in those counties? So just maybe something to pique your interest with regards to just some other ideas of different types of research that you can do. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to discuss today is I want to jump back over into my map. And instead of looking at the US, I want to jump over into a state, just because I want to start overlaying a business on top of this. I'm going to turn off my filter. Okay, so I'll open that up, turn it off. And what I also want to do is I want to get rid of the surrounding areas. So as a little tip here, under view actions, you can apply a location mask. And this will get rid of just the areas outside of your chosen location. In this case, my chosen location is Texas, right? So it's basically just getting rid of the states outside of Texas. Now, what I mentioned at the beginning, as I talked about, well, there is a business database that is built into SimplyAnalytics, particularly through Indiana University. You're going to have access to Dun & Bradstreet's points of interest business directory. So that's going to give you access to over 5 million businesses. And the business that I want to overlay here is especially going to be like hospitals, right? Like I want to look up maybe some hospitals on top of this map. So what I'll do is under businesses here at the top left, what I want to do is I want to overlay, again, hospitals. But there's a few different ways to overlay businesses on top of your map, including the business search. So this business search here allows you to type in something like Starbucks, or you could type in hospital. It's a really general keyword search. But in my case, I actually want to look up a NAICS code. If you're not familiar with those, basically every business in the US has a NAICS and an SIC code. It's basically an industry classification system. So if you're a hair salon, there's a code for that. If you're a Mexican restaurant, there's a code for that. And what I want to look up is I want to look up a type of hospital. So I'm going to open up my browse by business categories here. And this allows you to browse through these different codes to kind of look through this directory, but I don't really have time to browse through those. So I'm actually just going to utilize the search functionality here at the top. And I'm going to type in hospital. And you can see here that if I type in hospital, there's these hospital supply businesses, but I want to look up these general medical and surgical hospitals. So I'll just click on that. And once you do that, they will be added onto your map. Now, again, this is just very interesting, right? Because we get to look up the location of hospitals relative to the prevalence of cases, right? So this is very useful if you're going to be doing some general research, especially on, some certain larger counties or areas that would be considered like a medically underserved place, right? So if we are looking in South Texas, you can see, well, it's kind of interesting, right? Because there's places where there's not a lot of general medical and surgical hospitals in the nearby areas. And again, let's look at counties, right? So this is actually very large locations here. Okay, so let me just zoom out a little bit here. So that actually covers everything I wanted to discuss today. So we actually talked about a lot. And just to give you a really quick overview of everything that we did, again, we're SimplyAnalytics. We partner with data companies, and we take their data, incorporate it into our platform in a way that is approachable and easy to use. Today, what we did when we created our project, we took a look at maps and how maps are great to just visualize a data variable. So we first created a map of counties in the United States by prevalence of COVID-19 cases for a particular date. We then took a look at creating a comparison table, which again is just you building a table from scratch. You specify your target locations and you specify your target data variables. We then took a look at creating a ranking report, which the ranking report is one of my favorite reports because it allows you to bulk analyze thousands of locations at once, as long as those locations are within one larger geography. So in my case, I looked up all of the counties in the US. And what's great about, again, SimplyAnalytics is it just takes you a few seconds to actually do that. We then took a look at the related data table, which is just a really great way of quickly adding in a bunch of data variables. So you specify one data variable and we throw in all of the sibling variables. So if we throw in this housing built in 1939 or earlier, we're going to present you with all of the years of housing structures that we have. We can look up the COVID data for a particular day, and this will throw in all the days. So it's just a really convenient way of not having to click on a bunch of data variables. We then took a look at creating scatter plots and bar charts, right? So we created this scatter plot of all the counties in the US, where we had the prevalence of cases on the x-axis and the educational attainment on the y-axis. We then generated a really quick bar chart just to compare, just to have a visual analysis of comparing some target locations for my chosen data variable. In this case was total cases as of January 4th, 2021. And then we closed out with some more advanced features, which is talking about creating creating filters and applying those filters onto a map or applying those filters onto a ranking report. And then lastly, we closed with talking about how we can overlay some business information on top of your maps. So we definitely covered a lot in this 40 or so minute session, but hopefully, again, if you're new to Simply Analytics, hopefully this has piqued your interest in terms of maybe getting some ideas of the types of research that you can do. I definitely recommend exploring Simply Analytics. Again, through your university, you have access to tens of thousands of data variables that are very unique, and it's very interesting, and it's a fun data analytics application. So with that said, thank you everyone for having me, and that concludes the demo portion of this session. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Juan. Are there any questions? You can either unmute yourself and speak or type it into the chat box. I had one quick question for you, Juan. In terms of the data, how many days behind? I see there's some January data, but roughly how many days behind is the per 100,000 data that you have?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically, that should only lag by about a day, but within the past few weeks, we've been focusing on adding all of the new ACS data. So we should, as of next week, we're just going to backfill January 11th through January 19th. So generally, it should only lag by about 1 day. But as of right now, it'll be up to January 10th, 2021. But like I said, we'll backfill that by next week, and we'll get back on track. So great question.
I have a question. How are you able to isolate just Texas? So I want to look at data at Indiana for a specific ethnic group, and I don't want to see the other states. I just want to see Indiana. So I'm getting it to emphasize Indiana, like the borders, but I still able to see the other states, and I don't want to see that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and is that on a map?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what you would want to do in that case is you'd want to jump over into your state here. And then what you want to do is under view actions at the top right, this drop down at the top right, you want to click on apply location mask. And if you do that, that'll remove.
Okay, it worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And that's a really great feature as well, especially if you are looking up any other, so let's say if I jump into my home zip code here, it's also just a really wonderful feature, because if I just have my zip code here, you can see it shows all the surrounding areas, but if I just apply that location mask, it's just kind of nice. So great question.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Okay. So if there are no further questions, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. And keep in mind, you are always welcome to contact us at support@simplyanalytics.com, and we're happy to answer any of your questions. And we're also happy to do any formal training. So if anyone out there has thought that, oh, this was kind of interesting and you want an actual training session, I'm happy to actually set up like a formal training session, which will be a little bit more step by step, as opposed to today, which was more so like you could do this and you could do that type of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, since we have some instructors on this call, that also our subscription only comes with about a handful of concurrent users normally, but Simply Analytics, at least in the past, has been, if we make a request, can sometimes up that if you're teaching it in the class and everyone's going to be following along. Is that still true, Juan?
Yes, absolutely. So if you give us 24 hours notice and you just shoot us an email and say, hey, teaching a class with 30 students and I want them to follow along, yeah, we're happy to extend concurrent seats. And yeah, so you just give us an email, 24 hours notice via email, and we'll just get that set up. It's free of charge as well, so it's just as a courtesy that we're happy to do that.
Well, and we're just at the hour, so I just want to thank Juan for his presentation, and just quickly shout out next week's webinar, which is with BCC Research. So this 1 hour webinar will cover health-related data, including face masks, disposable hospital supplies, etc. And he will be featuring Tim Smith, who is head editor at BCC Research. So he'll be giving his analyst insight, particularly on pharma and healthcare. So please feel free to sign up for that one next. A new product that we've just licensed. And just want to finally, once again, give Juan a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yep, and I am going to stop recording first. And Bob, did you have a question? Sorry, I saw you unmuted.
No, I was going to